Excellent. I have the pleasure of being the first speaker, and so I get to say good morning. After this, it'll be really weird if someone says good morning. So it's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank everyone, Kirk and the rest of their team, for inviting me. And this is very unique for me. I've done a lot of talks over the last 20 years, and this is probably the most diverse geographic crowd I've ever presented to. We've got representatives here from South America, Central America, the Caribbean, and obviously North America as well. So a little bit of a transatlantic assembly here. So really excited to share my perspectives with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about technology change in the context of some of the things that we're dealing with today in the enterprise. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to position it for you so that you can take advantage of it in your individual businesses. Okay? Without a doubt, I'll cover artificial intelligence. And the challenge with covering artificial intelligence is that there is a wide collective spectrum of point of views on artificial intelligence. And it's very hard to parse the signal from the noise. So just to put a framework in place, and I call this our collective intelligence. So how many optimists are in the room when it comes to AI? Okay, good, excellent. So what about realists? We got a couple of realists. Okay, if you're a pessimist, don't put up your hand. It's probably not a good idea. Okay, and this spectrum is wide, and I'm here to say that there are valid points of views in all of these points on this spectrum. And it's probably one of the most important conversations you got to have with others and with yourself today. Now, there's two other spots on this, what I call collective intelligence spectrum. There is evangelists and there are alarmists. If you're an alarmist, you know who you are. Okay? So when you think about this and you think about what's going on here, you really want to think about where do you want to be? And where I want to kind of focus my remarks here is right within the realist and the optimist space, right? Because I think this is where opportunity really lies. So Kirk and I are going to do a fireside chat later on, and I'm going to reference examples and point of views and opportunities across the side. And I'm going to tell you when I'm being an alarmist, and I'm going to tell you when I'm being an evangelist. But for my prepared remarks, we're going to be right in the center there. So today's talk is called The Fundamental Transformation of Human Productivity. And you go, human productivity, Richie, what are you talking about? I'm talking about what do we do to create utility in our lives? And to start this off, I want to put into context what people are feeling globally. It feels like the world is falling apart. If you think about war, inflation, post-COVID, there are a couple of other things that I don't want to mention because they have political context to them. But at the same time, AI, transformation, digital, all of these things that are going on, usually when you see this type of disturbance in the force, there's probably a real big opportunity that's actually sitting hidden inside of it. Thank you for the water. I appreciate it. So what I see is evidence of Goldilocks conditions. Everybody knows Goldilocks conditions? Good. I see evidence of Goldilocks conditions that we're going to fundamentally transform human productivity. If you think about what human productivity was about 50 to 100 years ago, it was mostly manual work. When I talk about manual work, now I'm from Guyana, so I was born in Guyana in South America. I've been kind of vacationing in the U.S. permanently for the last 30 years. That's how I describe it, right? When my grandfather was giving me advice about going to college, I had to learn a trade. I was supposed to learn plumbing or carpentry or welding or something like that. I ignored him and went into computer science anyway, but that was a point of view of the manual worker. And over the last 50 to 100 years, we transformed to knowledge workers. Most of us that are in this room today are knowledge workers. Manual workers focus on physical strength, working with material mediums. And it's kind of like a hobby today, right? My kid always wants to do woodwork with me. He doesn't realize that at one point that was real work, right? Knowledge workers, cognitive strength, information mediums. That's the economy that we live in today. Now, I don't want to pretend like I actually came up with this. Peter Drucker one of the most brilliant management minds that has ever walked this planet is the person that actually came up with this concept that says, we're going to transform fundamentally from manual work to knowledge work. We're sitting on the precipice of doing the same thing again. Okay? Now, a long time ago, I wrote an article that says knowledge workers are mostly bored. And the point I was making in this article is that, you know what? Eventually, something like AI is going to come around. Look at these images that I had in this article. And I came up with the phrase visionary workers. To say, what's going to replace manual workers? Visionary workers. Now, this actually was in 2014, June 17, 2014. So about, 9 years ago? 9 years ago. Crazy idea, visionary workers. Well, what's that going to be? I believe that's exactly where we're going. And visionary workers focus on creative strength. And they work with imaginative mediums. Now, I don't know how long it's going to take to get there. It took about 50 to 100 to go from manual work to knowledge work. I'm willing to bet that it's going to be shorter than the time that it took to go from manual work to knowledge work. So let's take a look at what actually happened in this first transition, because as you look at uncertainty, history is probably one of the best teachers to be able to deal with uncertainty in the future. So let's take a look back, okay? What was happening? The ingredients of the last transformation of productivity, and I think this is the core thesis of AI. You have to think about AI and productivity at the same time, because that's where they intersect, was that there was economic shocks. There was world wars. World War II was kind of coming to an end. And there were massive 0 to 1 inventions that we were dealing with at the same time. So we understand the economic shock. The 0 to 1 invention that we were dealing with at the same time was the introduction of the motor. Now, I was living on the equator when I saw the motor for the first time. When you see a motor for the first time, especially if you're living on the equator, the only thing you can imagine what you would build out of it is a fan, because it's hot. You don't see Caterpillar, right? You don't see automation. You don't see all the fast buildings and machines that are going to be started up at the same time. But the motor actually is the thing that cannibalized the demand for manual work. That is what was attacking productivity at the time. And when the motor was first introduced, rightfully so, there was a collective intelligence spectrum as well. There were alarmists, there were evangelists, there were optimists, and there were pessimists. Because guess what? The thing that you're worried about the most, how many people got kids in the room? Okay, so a good population is, what are my children going to do? Right? Where are they going to find work? Because all I know about work is carpentry. At the same time, there was a second 0 to 1 innovation that was happening. The personal computer. And this introduced the opportunity for knowledge work. Because now we can share our informational mediums faster, wider apart. Welcome to the internet. You don't have to be in the same factory to generate value. Productivity is now deployed globally across the planet. And so as you think about this transition, it's important that you take a look at how did it play out before? What were the companies that won? In this 50 to 100 year period, the S&P 500 shifted 98%. 2% of the companies that started this transition exist today, and you can count them on your fingers. In every massive disruption, there's always opportunity. Now, there are also unintended consequences. Kirk talked this morning about a little bit of overload of technology and social media. We were not as woke about the computer as we are about AI today. Think about it. The entire globe is talking about ethics of AI, inclusivity of AI, bias of AI. Imagine if we were having that conversation the first time you did, you got mail. You guys remember that one? Imagine if we were having that conversation about the computers. We might have avoided some of the unintended consequences to society. Now, do we have the Goldilocks conditions today to trigger this massive transformation in human productivity? Well, We are feeling economic shock. If there's one thing that came from COVID, is that it is the first time this entire species has gone through something together. Think about it. Every race, every gender, every age, every country, every geography had to go through it at the same time. And it had economic impact because it slowed down and seized economic impact. Okay? And there are also 2 0-to-1 interventions that are going on. AI. I equipped AI to electricity. You can think about electricity as simply as these lights. Or you can think about electricity as the energy that fuels and feeds systems such as communication satellites, intergalactic traveling machines. It's very complex. When you think about AI, everybody here, I guarantee you, uses AI a couple of dozen times a day. Every time you open up Netflix and it suggests something to you, what do you think you're using? Every time your car tells you you're a little too close to one of those lanes and it beeps, what do you think you're using? Computer vision to look at the road, to see the lines, to how close the car is. Heck, every time Siri accidentally thinks you're talking to her, what do you think you're using? Nobody gets that one? Like Siri never starts to talk to you randomly when you didn't mean to talk to her? All the time. And I usually go, actually, I don't have my Apple Watch on today, but I usually go, I am not speaking to you. So AI stands to commoditize knowledge work. These are the facts. And depending on how you look at that collective opinion spectrum, it is going to make or break how you actually thrive in this world of uncertainty that is in front of us. Now, I don't think that all knowledge workers are going to be wiped out. No way. Because guess what? All manual workers are not wiped out, but a significant portion of them were wiped out. And the companies that take advantage in the beginning are the ones that tend to see the opportunities before the companies that act as laggards. So we've got this point of view where one massive invention commoditizes one style of work and one massive invention enables another style of work. And the question is, what is going to be the massive invention that's going to enable visionary work? How are we going to find more productivity when we only have things like Zoom and screen share? Like, we have squeezed as much as we can get out of those, right? There's only so many spreadsheets you can share before humanity starts to fall asleep. The next thing I see is we're going to have to increase the aperture of what we can transfer between each other real fast. Let me underscore that for a little bit. The computer allows us to transfer more information than we could with mail. Faster, more, wider, more reach, more scale. And that's how we kind of got smarter, got more productive. We are going to have to outlearn machine learning in order to thrive. Our children are going to have to outlearn machine learning. Now, I have some very optimistic views on this, and I have alarmist views on this. I'm happy to share those in the fireside chat afterwards. But at the crux, we're going to have to expand the aperture of what we can do with each other. And that might be able to enable visionary work. When I'm talking about visionary work, I'm talking about an interconnected imagination network where I can take my entire imagination, sir, and just plop it right over to you. And right now for communication, if you guys think about the aperture of what transfers between me and someone else, it's about 5%. Man, what's going on in my head? You're not seeing the whole thing. You're only hearing what's coming across. And you're highly intelligent. You're processing about 5%. You're remembering about half of that, and you're only going to retain about half of what you actually remember. We're communicating still like dinosaurs, while AI is learning really fast in 4K. We teach like Neanderthals. I have to tell my kid something 6 times before he remembers it. How many times have you had to say to your kid, how many times did I tell you that? Everybody's raising their hands, right? So we have to increase the aperture to get to visionary work because the knowledge work is going to become commoditized. Now, that sounds scary. What are our children going to do? Right? Same fear that our parents and grandparents had. But let me ask you this question. Who wants to go back to manual work? Anybody here? Who wants to go back to telegrams? Who wants to go back to kerosene lamps in your house to study without electricity? Who wants to ride a horse instead of driving a car? We got a couple of those. I'm with you. I'm a horse rider myself. Okay? But it's more of a luxury. It's not a utility, right? So we've got these two things that are happening at the same time. Generative AI and spatial computing. That's what we're dealing with. Anything. If you kind of put them down and you abstract them out, we're dealing with generative AI, which creates threat and opportunity, and we're dealing with spatial computing, which creates threat and opportunity. Now, what's unique about AI that is different from the other sort of big technological inventions is that the entire world is starting from zero at the same time. Think about electricity. South America, Europe had a 50-year jump start on electricity. The internet, North America had a 20-year jump start on electricity when compared to South America. But for AI, we're all in on day one, baby. That's what's different. It's an equalizer. And for the markets that don't have big infrastructure already in place, you may actually have a leapfrog opportunity. For the type of industry that you guys and gals are in, where skill matters, you've been reskilling your teams for a long time. You actually are really good at reskilling. This is the moment to start to reskill. Now, when you think about spatial computing, it's not all roses and lilies over there either. There is a wide range of point of views on spatial computing as well, right? Now, nobody's going to forget this image. Anybody here will ever be able to unsee this image? Nobody's going to forget this image. This is Apple's Vision Pro. Spatial computing. I'm going to give you another image that you're not going to be able to forget either. This one. This is what's going to happen to the kids. I mean, you can't get your children off their iPads right now, much less taking this thing off their heads. And these are pretty affluent children. Their clothes are not dirty. They look pretty affluent. The 4 billion that haven't been introduced to the internet yet might be introduced this way. So spatial computing is not all roses and lilies either. There are challenges and opportunities there. Now, I'm certainly not saying that I want to go back to this. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that this may not be the smartest thing in the world either. And so I want to show you guys something. I want to show you a different path to spatial computing. A path where you don't have to put a headset on. I'm going to show you immersive glass and interactive air on this laptop that I have right here. This is a Mac. There's no hardware on it. These are just wires that are connected up. I don't have any sensors on me. I don't have a headset on me. And I'm going to show you where spatial computing is going and what can come out of it. And then we're going to wrap up with a couple of remarks to talk a little bit about economic change and cultural change, and then we'll go into a fireside chat. So let me get out of PowerPoint. And what I'm going to open up here is a product we call Airglass. This is the 3D version of Airglass. And I want to show you some really cool stuff about it. So remember, I don't have any hardware on me. I'm just standing back here. And what you're going to notice, if I lean in, this screen leans into my face. If I lean out, it leans away. Now, you guys are getting my perspective, so you may feel a little dizzy. But for me, this is a perception of depth. And I don't have the dizziness because when I move around, the entire screen moves to my face. I can have all the perception of depth that I'm looking for. This feels like a VR, AR experience without having a headset. And when you think about AI, realize that AI has the same thing. There are approaches that are good for humanity, and there are approaches that are not good for humanity. Now, of course, if this was all I was going to show you, this wouldn't be that interesting. These come alive. Gesture recognition, machine learning, computer vision, and principles of the natural user interface. Watch this. And as you're looking at the screen, look over here at me in real life. At the same time, I'm simply drawing in the air. I can lean in and look in that, and if I go to the side, whoa, drew completely into the depth. Now, I'm a nerd, so we don't figure out gestures well, so like thumbs down is erase. We're still working through how this is supposed to behave. My hands can engage with the screen. Let me show you what you could do with things like this. And as you think about where the world is going, artificial intelligence, spatial computing, here's a collaboration example. I'm in a different room. Now, usually people can be back here in this mirror with me. Imagine if you're presenting slides. How many here have seen Minority Report? Yeah? Watch this. See my hands are hovering around the slides? I can just grab one and just pull it forward. Lean in, look around. Want to change a slide? I want to change a slide differently. Watch this. Right in the ear. In the corner, swipe. Okay? Draw, grab, close, go back out. This is AI as well. We call this immersive AI. This is machine learning, computer vision, and principles of the natural user interface. This has implications and opportunities globally and across all industries. This is something we're working with a pharmaceutical company on how doctors and reps are going to meet in the future. This is sort of a lab here. This over here, right here, this is a Salesforce record, live. I'm going to grab Salesforce and just pull it into my view. Over here is the PDF that the rep would use to talk to the doctor. On this side, and I'm just moving through here, beating heart, simulated data. I can grab this, move this heart around, bring that artery right into my view, and just lean right into it. The future is bright, ladies and gentlemen. We have to be careful. I want to show you guys one more, and then I'll go back to slides. This could be a scene from Finding Nemo. I'm looking into the ocean. I'm looking around the ocean. I'm going to put my hands up and start to spin my perspective here so you can see what I'm doing. Pull this right out. This could be a movie that you could watch from multiple perspectives. I'm going to lean in on the side and just do a fly through. So the camera is spinning without me moving right now. We've built this on open source machine learning models. We just got accepted into NVIDIA's Inception program for startups. We're starting to move to the NVIDIA models. But what you're seeing here with just open source is I'm drawing in 3D in a movie as I watch it from multiple perspectives on a laptop that doesn't have any hardware on it. And I am not wearing a headset. I'm going to spin that back so you get a point of view of what happened there. We're working on this for about 3 years. This is where we are today. We're excited about where it's going to go. So back to our conversation. There's a spectrum in everything. Every new technological advancements has had opportunities and threats in front of it. Do you know that there were people lobbying for horses when the engine was introduced? Yeah. Pickets, right? And protest. Do you remember what happened when the calculator was introduced? Oh, they're going to cheat on the exams, right? This is where we're sitting. This is the opportunity. And we're starting from ground zero. Now, there are lots of things to be wondrous about. And there are multiple point of views. Think about AI ethics for a second. AI definitely has bias in it right now. Okay? But so does the rest of the world. Humans are insanely biased. But if we can train AI and we can put frameworks for trustworthy AI around it, maybe we could build a system that doesn't have bias. Everyone's like, oh, AI is going to make mistakes about doctors, doctor records and in healthcare. Well, guess what? 250,000 people in the U.S. alone die from mistakes that are made in the healthcare system, right? If you're in GI, I think the statistic is that 20% of healthcare providers in GI miss about 20% of the polyps on the imaging, whereas computer vision misses about 3% of the polyps in imaging. So what that tells me is in 10 years, if you're practicing GI without AI, if that's 17% spread, that's malpractice. So there are opportunities here, and we're all starting at ground zero. This is what I do. My purpose is I don't want my kid to end up with a headset on all day. That's kind of why I'm working on the technology. We will transition from knowledge workers to visionary workers. And if you're afraid of it, I'm going to tell you right now, most humans only use about 5% of our brains. In this room, probably 6 or 7%. This looks like a high IQ room. Okay? But we're not always at 5. Every time we were faced with a moment of extinction, we started to use more of our brain. We got a lot of headroom to go. We got 95% headroom to go. And the kids in the Caribbean don't have smaller brains than the kids in Europe. That's just not the case. And then the next question is, how are we going to share our imaginations? Well, I remind you that at one point, all of business was done in this thing, a box where paper would come. So we have been increasing the aperture of what we can transfer between each other over and over and over again. And to go before this, at one point, we just grunted at each other, right? Think about that for a second. Like, language is only a couple of 100 years old. So I think it's time to start cultivating your visionary and your creative abilities if you are looking to compete with artificial intelligence. Those are the end of my prepared remarks. I'm looking forward to the fireside chat with Kirk. Thank you.
Excellent job, Richie. Got people thinking, which we want to do.
Hopefully nobody's scared.
I know they don't look too scared to me. So I want to take off on that equalizing, starting from ground zero, as you described, and knowing so many of the countries that are represented here, knowing the Guyana where you're from, is it truly equal when you think about starting whatever you're doing in Cambridge or Stanford or Miami? What conditions would you want to be seeing in some of those markets outside?
Well, so it's technologically equal, but productivity doesn't change with just technology. There are 3 components of how societies change. There's productivity, there's government, infrastructure, and regulation, and then there's culture. And those 3 things have to move in tandem in order for us to get it right. If technology gets ahead of regulation and infrastructure, you can have bad consequences. If regulation and infrastructure gets ahead of technology, you can stifle innovation. And if regulation and technology get ahead of culture, you can invent a whole bunch of stuff that nobody uses, right? So I think in the Caribbean specifically and in South America, well, not so much in South America, but in the Caribbean and less so in Central America, where the real challenge is the lack of political and business infrastructure, right? And this is not to say that the people in these regions are not working hard at it. I mean, just remember, less than 100 years ago, the colonialism ended and the British just left, right? It just picked up and flew out one day. You didn't have education. We didn't have government. We didn't have a police system, right? We didn't have healthcare. We didn't even have passports. We didn't have currency. So it takes there's like 100-year hangover that the post-colonialism hangover. And so what I'm excited about with South America, Central America, and the Caribbean is we're just getting past that 100-year hangover now, where infrastructure is starting to get introduced, policies are starting to get introduced, trade regulation is starting to get introduced. Economies are starting to look more predictable. Everybody knows, most people don't know there's a stock exchange in Jamaica with liquidity, right? So I think that these things are just on the precipice of starting to come together. The real challenge that I see, though, is not the individual countries kind of accelerating this trade infrastructure and government infrastructure. It's the scale by which they're capable of doing it. A lot of these countries are small. Now, in South America, we got Brazil and others, which are big countries. But if you think about the United States for a second, imagine if every state in the United States was a country by itself. Wouldn't be a powerhouse. If you think about the European Union, I mean, they had to aggregate their resources together to compete with the United States. So just specifically to the Caribbean, and I think there are many other areas, we need to have the United Islands of the Caribbean. We need a shared trade infrastructure. When a doctor moves from Barbados to Jamaica, that licensing should just transfer over, right? We need a treasury that's asset-backed. Guyana now has petroleum. Guyana could be the backing of the treasury, where we have liquidity on a system, right? And we also need all the rest of sort of educational infrastructure that would come with it. One of the things that I like about spatial AI or spatial technology is that now you can actually teach and upskill people over a computer because you can transfer so much more. There's lots of opportunities in the emerging markets, but I think the trade infrastructure and the government's where the challenge is.
Great. What is the future of this product you're describing here? Where do you see it applying to this market and other markets?
Upskilling. As every time we show this technology to someone else, education comes up, training comes up, upskilling comes up. We showed it to a university professor the other day, and you guys noticed that I was mixed in with the content, so I could point at the content and engage with it at the same time. And the professor said something to me that I never thought about. And he says, "Oh, children don't have to look at my shoulder anymore." Well, meaning the back of his shoulder. I was, what is he talking about? He goes, when I go to write on the blackboard and I do this, they're looking at this over here, but now I can actually point at the isosceles triangles and put my hands around it. So this increase of aperture, I think it's important for commerce. It's going to be important for entertainment, but education and upskilling, which is one of the things that we have to do in order to compete with AI, is where I see the best opportunity.
Another thing that you know a lot about, Richie, is prior to this world you're living in now, you were within some very big organizations, global organizations. And I'm sure at that time you still had this entrepreneurial fire that you clearly possess now. What guidance or what insights would you offer people who might be the audience here today who are within those organizations and also trying to grasp this wave that's about to hit them and their organizations? How do you characterize the path, the smart path for them to follow, and then contrast that with the general entrepreneur, technology entrepreneur who might be with us today?
So I was at UBS, I was at Lehman Brothers, I was at Prudential Securities, lots of digital transformation always happening. At Pru, it was desktop computing. We dealt with mobile, social, all sorts of stuff. I find the transformation always comes down to the first mile and the last mile. First mile is how do you get the right stakeholder support? And the last mile is how do you get people to adopt? Now, a lot of people have done work getting the stakeholder support together, and then you build amazing systems and nobody adopts them, right? The first mile and the last mile are still probably the most important aspects of transformation today. What is unique about today is the half-life of an enterprise transformation. While I was in the large enterprises, you had about 2 to 3 years to kind of, receive a new technology, find the partners, do the upskilling, build the talent, put the capital together, and roll out a plan. It was 2 to 3 years. And, you'd be dealing with 2 or 3 at the same time, mobile and social at the same time, right? In today's kind of environment, it's about a 12 to 18-month period that you got to get it right. And that's because it's so much easier and faster with all the cloud services and the hyperscalers to be able to absorb this. But it means that everybody has to move faster. Plus, 2 AI startups were launched since I got on stage. Okay, so there are just much more things that you have to deal with at the same time. So I think enterprises need help more now than they ever did.
But on that scale of pessimist and optimist, I don't know how you feel, but I'm a huge pessimist on the nimbleness or lack of nimbleness of organizations.
Well, the great thing about markets is they never lie, right? The market will tell the truth. And so I think the organizations that are not nimble, that are not going all in on AI, the market will indicate to them whether they made the right choices or not. We see that today. I mean, I hate to use Blockbuster, and everybody kind of knocks on Blockbuster. If you were ex-Blockbuster executive, please don't be offended. But like, they got Netflixed, okay? And they were sitting down on probably one of the best opportunities that they are. What's unique about AI is I think people get lost in the models and in the parameter count or the token count. The models are going to be commoditized. Everybody's going to have access to the most sophisticated models. What's unique is data. I think if you're a service provider today, you get into data quality business because data is the input to AI. And these large language models, while they're unique and they're awesome and they're interesting, what I'm interested about is the micro language models. If you're a bank or you're a healthcare provider or you're in transportation or you're in energy, think about the data that you have and the intelligence that you can extract from that to drive productivity. And how does that become both a competitive moat for you as well as new business models and products and services where you could sell AI as a product to your competitors? So all of this requires exactly what we're doing today, which is to have a conversation about it so we can start to learn from each other and kind of evolve this process.
Let's go back to more of a personal question, Rich. I really impressed by where you started, where you ended up, but I kind of want to look at it a little bit of a different way. We've often said at this conference, there's smart people everywhere, which you sort of said at your initial remarks there. So that is a fact. We all know that in this room, but a lot of other people in this country are a long way from understanding that. You've come from a very interesting country, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on Guyana in general, but particularly on the path you've traveled. What are the entrepreneurs who are coming from outside the United States that are entering the United States facing today? Is it easier? Is it harder? Reflect on your path, what you learned, what you would like to see this country move toward if it's going to keep pace with all these innovative changes.
Yeah. Well, I think so. First of all, I got lucky a lot, right? So this is not all self-earned, so to speak. You get lucky a lot. It has gotten better. So when I first arrived here, I got here in 92, right? I got here in 92, and it's like traveling to the future because from Guyana, you're 40 years behind. And so you fly on a five-hour flight, and then you land at JFK. And the first thing that startled me was the amount of limos that were in front of me, because I thought only Eddie Murphy had a limo because I'd seen in Coming to America that he had a limo. And I show up at JFK, and there's just limos all over. And I start wondering, well, is Eddie Murphy here or what's going on, right? So it is startling. And those are sort of the small comedic aspects of it. But understanding patents, you don't have a patent vocabulary in certain markets where I came from. Understanding incorporating companies, understanding rule of law, understanding markets. So I think that as much as immigrants come to the country and do amazing things, there's a gap between understanding capitalism versus understanding making money. And those are two very, very different things. One of them is linear and one of them is exponential. And I was lucky to kind of go to school and meet a couple of people who, their parents worked on Wall Street. And when I visited them, everybody had an S-Class in their driveway, and I was wondering, how am I going to do this, with what I'm doing right now? So part of it is your exposure and your network, but it's that intentionality to understand that America doesn't only has an up, it has an up with exponentiality inside of it at the same time.
Let me ask one more thing, and this is putting you on the spot a little bit, but I see how much you have to offer, and then you come from this country that, of all the countries, the entire Americas, and maybe globally, is going through an incredibly unique period. Incredibly, the opportunity Guyana has is like no other, almost anywhere. What goes through your head, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot too much, but what goes through your head on, I don't want to use the word responsibility, but what pulls you or pushes you away from realizing, wow, what an opportunity to leapfrog?
So Guyana is going through probably the largest transformation in the region right now. The last thing I saw was Guyana is the fastest growing GDP in the world.
Over 50%.
Guyana is the fastest growing GDP in the world right now. Breakneck speed. First of all, there's going to be a lot of mistakes. You don't go from 0 to 50, in 5 years and not make mistakes. There's going to be a lot of collisions. There's going to be a lot of mistakes. I'm not running for office. I've been accused of it a couple of times. But I think that Guyana specifically and much of the rest of the region, there are still social and cultural ilks that are in diseases that are in the system. Guyana has a massive kind of like racial divide still that has to be healed, that has to be supported. The political infrastructure in Guyana is just not where it should be. I think we've got intelligent people that are entering politics right now. That rule of law, that trade infrastructure has to get there. I personally am very interested in the country and the region. As a matter of fact, the first time I showed this technology, I showed it in Jamaica at a conference called Tech Beach. And I've been trying to give back and drive the narrative, etc. But what's missing is a bridge, right? To go there, I have to fly there. I have to figure out who to talk to. I got to, deal with 5-6 different people who want to be bribed for me to meet the guy that I need to talk to before. There's no bridge. But the work that you're doing here with Nearshore Americas, this is the closest that there is to a bridge for someone like myself to be able to take a step over and know that, my reputation can be kept intact, that I'm speaking to the right people, and that my time will generate return. So I think part of it is building that bridge as well. There is no bridge for someone to kind of take the diaspora of 250 to 500 people that are in here from the Caribbean and deploy them over.
I've got to ask this question then. On that, a bridge works from both ends. It's not a one-way, it's a two-way.
Yep.
So what responsibility to organizations here, to very well-educated people who yet they're well-educated. I've run this for a lot, as you can imagine, last 13 years.
Yep.
You say X country, and they go from, you would think, highly evolved, intelligent person to having incredibly narrow, ignorant points of view. How we don't seem to talk a lot about the responsibility those of us in the United States should have. And I hate to use the word should, but you've been in the corporate world. It's in the best interest of this country to understand these things.
Yep.
So,
well, look, I think from a macroeconomic perspective, we have labor gaps and skill gaps that are starting to come into view in HD right now, right? Everybody looks at unemployment, they go, oh my God, what do you mean we have a labor gap, right? There's still people out of work. But if you think about geographic proximity, and if you think about the type of work that is coming versus the type of works that passed, there's a massive labor gap and skill gap. And so I think, again, I don't think markets lie. I think countries like the United States and regions like Europe are going to have to look for new labor pools, new talent pools, and this is where the opportunity is. It's upskilling, right? These regions should be upskilling in preparation for that. Now, I hope that when we do it this time, it's not like the last time those regions went looking for labor pools and talent pools. That one didn't play out too well, right? Those were sugarcane factories that ended up, in kind of terrible outcomes. But from a macro perspective, there is a labor gap that's expanding, and a skill gap that's expanding. And AI helps here too. Let me just give you on the optimism side of AI. Right, to remember that spectrum that I'm talking about. At Mayo Clinic, there's about 3 people who can listen to your voice and tell whether you have Parkinson's or ALS. Literally, 3 very brilliant individuals that could just listen to your voice and tell. Now, if you think about someone in the rural parts of this country or someone from a different continent, you don't have access to that type of skill, right? But at the Mayo Clinic, they trained an AI model. I think they used 10,000 voices, had those 3 individuals tune that model. And today they have a voice app that anyone from anywhere in the world can now just put their voice into the voice app and get a pretty good indication as to whether you're exposed to Parkinson's or ALS, right? So there are use cases where scale matters, but that doesn't mean that it's going to commoditize jobs. There's still a lot of creativity that had to go into that. There's still a lot of art that had to go into that. And while AI sets up sort of the first draft of what you can do, somebody still needs to do the final draft, right? So I think these other markets that are starting from zero right now, at the same time the U.S. and Canada and every other country in Europe and Asia are starting from zero, there's massive opportunity.
Well, Richie, you've done a tremendous job getting us on an 8-cylinder path of thought provocation today. So I really appreciate your time. Well done. Thank you.